The Metal Gear series spans so many years, games and console generations that you'll find every game in the series is someone's favourite. Some had never played a game like Metal Gear Solid before it came out, so you can understand why people would like that one the best. Metal Gear Solid 2's ending is straight up prophetic, so I get liking that one the best. Metal Gear 2 is a fantastic game for its time, and I can also see why that would be someone's favourite. And some people even like Metal Gear Solid 5 the best, and you know, we're all wrong sometimes, so I can forgive those people. But my favourite Metal Gear game is Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater from the Metal Gear Solid HD collection for the Xbox 360, featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series and Knuckles. And I'm going to tell you why I like it so much, and specifically why it's the best Metal Gear game. MGS3 has you playing as Naked Snake, who would later grow up to be this handsome mess of pixels, as he infiltrates the Soviet Union during the Cold War to stop the development of the Shagohod, an all-terrain tank capable of firing nuclear missiles. Snake also has to take out the boss, his former mentor, as she defected to the Soviet Union and caused heightened tensions between the USSR and the USA. The boss has recruited the rest of her old Cobra unit to assist her and Colonel Volgin, the man behind the development of the Shagohod. Snake is supported by other members of Fox, the special ops group who has sent him on this mission, as well as Eva, a supposed KGB spy, who will assist him along the way. The story is filled with twists, double-crossing, triple-crossing and secret societies, all while referencing real-life events, being simultaneously fantastical and grounded. In this way, it's very similar to other Metal Gear plots, with one main exception. Snake Eater is a prequel to the previous games, and is the first playable set of events in the series timeline, taking place in 1964. This does some fantastic things for the narrative. Primarily, it simplifies everything greatly. There is no pressure to continue a narrative, allowing it to be relatively self-contained. At the time of release, Metal Gear Solid 3 took place 30 years before the next playable events in the timeline. So as an audience, we expect to see similarities and characters that we're familiar with, but they are so far away from being the characters we know them as that a great amount of freedom has been afforded to the story. The Ocelot of MGS3 is his own character, while still clearly being able to grow into the character that we know him as. This positioning in the franchise allows the game to leverage at once the aforementioned freedom, but also its namesake. Metal Gear Solid 3's narrative is both very Metal Gear and very new. The game carries on the consistent anti-war and anti-nuke sentiments, marking the beginning of the series' particular interests with nuclear deterrence. Beyond this, we see the game explore what makes an enemy and how this distinction can be very arbitrary, based on an invisible, made-up line in a propaganda campaign. Furthermore, there are discussions about what a soldier's purpose should be, and the dehumanizing nature of military and war. These themes are sold by the entertaining, interesting, and strange characters that talk about them. Naked Snake is less dejected than Solid Snake and more playful, smirking at the opportunity to drop a hornet's nest on a guard rather than the naivete of a stressed out recruit. When presented with a half-naked Eva, Naked Snake instead fawns over a custom pistol, immediately making small personalizations to suit his style of combat. He's just really easy to become invested in, and this investment makes his character arc more interesting and impactful. Snake is a fun character to play as, and serves as a great constant in the story, asking questions right when we've got them ourselves. His rapport with the support members of Paramedic and SIGINT is also fantastic. This support team aren't lying to him 5 times over, but are dependable and goofy. Paramedic tells you about different foods and movies, and you'll be calling her back just to hear her and Snake bicker back and forth. SIGINT is played more straight, but this creates a good dichotomy, where Snake is the weird one of the two, humorously bewildering SIGINT.
Snake, what are you doing?
I'm in a box.
A cardboard box? Why are you...
I don't know, I was just looking at it, and suddenly I got this irresistible urge to get inside. No, not just an urge. More than that. It was my destiny to be here. In the box.
Destiny?
Yeah, and then when I put it on, I suddenly got this feeling of inner peace. I can't put it into words. I feel safe. Like this is where I was meant to be. Like I'd found the key to true happiness.
Uh-huh.
Does any of that make sense?
Not even a little.
You should come inside the box. Then you'll know what I mean.
Man, I don't want to know what you mean.
Over time, it really feels like Snake becomes closer to both of them, and due to the fact that the player has to go out of their way to call them, there's a natural progression of these relationships, feeling more dynamic and believable. The boss is an enigmatic character whose established history with Snake makes her immediately intriguing. She serves as a window into Snake's life, and her position of authority over him allows her to touch on the themes mentioned earlier. She has a firm set of beliefs, having a great loyalty to her country, willing to die by her disciples' hand to help clear that country's name. She represents the results of a strong fetishization of war and military, a soldier whose loyalty has been exploited and used for the interest of a nation, an ultimately made-up entity that often does not represent the will and best interests of the people. In this circumstance, this exploitation could be justified, seeing as it possibly prevented a nuclear war, but I think what the boss represents is interesting, taking into account the 2004 release of MGS3 and America's recent war on terror at the time, especially considering the strong opposition to it, as well as the catastrophic amount of deaths it led to and profit it made for oil executives, many of whom had ties to Bush and his administration. The boss encourages Snake to distinguish between his duty and his personal feelings, and then decide which is more important. In particular, she references Snake's wearing of her bandana, feeling that if he holds on to his personal feelings he will never complete his mission, to kill her. However, Snake never removes the bandana, ultimately holding on to the parts of her that are important to him while still managing to end her life. The struggle to do this is displayed nicely, with the boss consistently disarming and debilitating Snake, as he over time defends himself better and eventually comes out on top. This triumph for Snake is cruelly undermined as we learn that the boss never really defected, but rather was sacrificed to ease the tensions between the US and the Soviets. While the boss is a complex character, Volgin is the complete opposite. That's exactly what's so great about him though. He's a palette cleanser, a drop of bright white in a sea of grey characters. As a player we can hold on to him as someone to really hate, giving us a constant sense of motivation and a clear goal. The rest of the Kobe unit are entertaining but not as engaging as characters when compared to the bosses of MGS 1 or 2. They serve as a good way to get small insights about the boss's past, with their own backstories not being delved into too much. I do think this is for the better, as the character dynamics of Snake, the boss, Eva and Ocelot have a level of intrigue and charm that makes you want to know about them, not the Kobe unit so much. One exception to this is the Sorrow, whose boss fight has great thematic significance. You wade through this shallow river as the ghosts of everything you've killed, including animals, drift past. There's no real combat in this fight, and depending on how many people you've killed, it could be 3 minutes long or 20. It forces you to confront what you've done as a player. Consider that these were people, living things. At the end of this fight, Snake dies, taking a revival pill and coming to underwater. We've seen Snake directly confront his violence, grapple with it in his mind. The more things you kill, the longer the fight, and seemingly the harder it was for Snake to digest and come to terms with his actions. This fight has fantastic atmosphere and intelligently challenges the player. We were given the option to play without killing anything, and so any dislike for this fight dragging on or its pace can really only be blamed on us. It's not cheap or shallow, it makes us consider why we were so quick to resort to violence. Perhaps it was easier, the most efficient way to complete our mission. So what does that say about us? We are resigning ourselves to the just following orders excuse, acting like we have no agency, choice and moral obligation over our actions. This plays into the idea of what a soldier should be, a blank slate who merely perpetuates the state's agenda, or someone who engages with what they're doing, trying to act justly, no matter how fruitless that endeavour may actually be. It makes us further question war and what it does to the people, those who really get no say in the content of a war. It also further develops Snake. As the story goes, we learned he's been lied to, and this mirrors the experience of many people in the military. Militaries often prey on the disadvantaged, promising to give purpose to kids who feel they have none. This leads to people justifying their perpetuation of suppression and imperialism by claiming that it was the only way they could get a higher education or earn some sort of living. These people have been manipulated by the very state who they will now serve the interests of, much like Snake himself. The whole experience of this boss fight is made better by its interactivity, as the player has to interact with the game on a more involved level, forcing you to pay more attention to what's being said here. What I touch on here is really important, as it forms the basis for my claim that Metal Gear Solid 3 is the best Metal Gear game, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, Ocelot is a perfect example of MGS3 benefiting from its position in the timeline and series. Here we get to see the gun-spinning weirdo that was Revolver Ocelot as a younger gun-spinning weirdo who also meows for some reason. The encounters between Snake and Ocelot are incredibly entertaining. You get to see how Ocelot's admiration for Snake grows as Snake continues to get the upper hand, with Ocelot using a different gun each time based on Snake's recommendation. This younger Ocelot is arrogant and brash, more immature and putting less thought behind his actions. And that's all you need for a prequel. Plant a few seeds and show some growth so that the viewer can reasonably see how Ocelot would become who he is later down in the timeline. The large time gap allows us to fill in the blanks, and from how Ocelot changes in MGS3, we can see how that would put him down the path to become Revolver Ocelot from MGS1. Eva is one of the most fleshed out characters of the game, spending a significant amount of time with Snake and being instrumental to the plot. Seeing the two of them grow to trust and rely on each other is actually really heartwarming, and it comes across naturally. The relationship between Eva and Snake also lets us see him being truly vulnerable. He's not under the constant facade of jokes, and it helps humanize him, make him more relatable. In general, Eva's characterization is a lot more natural and logical compared to how some other women in the franchise are written. Part of her mission is getting close to Snake and making him trust her, so it makes sense that she would sexualize herself. Her sexuality is something she has control over and is positioned as an important part of her. So, sure, having alternate angles in some cutscenes dedicated to Eva's chest is certainly gratuitous, but at least the sexualization of her makes more sense than that of Meryl or Quiet. It seems as though Kojima actually wrote a woman well somehow. Fortunately, she's not purely defined by her sexuality. Eva's shown to be a fantastic manipulator and spy, as well as a very capable fighter. Looking outside of the characters and actual plot detailing, Metal Gear Solid 3 has a great sense of pacing and action. The linear progression of the game makes for much tighter telling of the story and how it unfolds. There's generally a build-up of action, as things transition from the slow, deliberate stealth gameplay to action-heavy cutscenes. For example, after finding Sokolov and being ambushed by Ocelot, the two circle around each other, sizing the other up and considering their options. This cutscene starts out slow, much like the sneaking you did to get there, and ramps up only after a logical progression from gameplay has been established. The action is relatively personal throughout the game, typically being between Snake and a boss or villain. MGS3 really ramps up the scale of the action at the end of the game, but even then you're usually fleeing. I never get the sense that Snake is some invincible action hero, as the precedent of moving silently and avoiding confrontation is carried through to his actions in the story. Metal Gear Solid 3 manages to tell a compelling narrative with memorable characters, one that explores thoughtful themes and leverages its position in the timeline to feel excitingly new and nostalgically familiar all at the same time. This is all presented fantastically with great cinematography, music, and visuals. The shifts in tension and tone feel natural and allow for a great balance of fun and thoughtfulness. So we know what the story's like. What about the actual gameplay? The moment-to-moment gameplay involves sneaking past or eliminating guards to get from one side of a map to the other. This sounds very simple, but the gameplay systems interact with each other to provide a massive amount of depth. The first thing you'll likely notice when actually playing Metal Gear Solid 3 is the controls. They're kinda strange and obtuse, but also perfect for this game. There's the standard stuff like left stick to move and right stick to control the camera, but as you start trying to use items and move around in more specific ways, it gets weird. The most obvious is movement. You can crouch with A, but if you try to move while crouched, you'll instead go prone and move in that position. This means visibility while moving is a bit of an all or nothing game, and though this may sound annoying, and it is for a bit, I actually like this decision. This juxtaposition in movement encourages you to slow the pace down and observe the sentries, so that when you make your move, you do so with confidence. It also adds this great tension to raising suspicion. If a guard thinks he sees you, the best choice is to stay close to the ground and slowly back into cover or some vegetation. You have to know your surroundings if you want to avoid getting spotted. Next is using items and weapons. MGS3 has auto-aim thanks to its more over-the-head style camera, but if you want to get precise headshots, you'll need to use the first-person view. You can enter the view with right bumper and get a better look around at your surroundings, though you have to be stationary while in this perspective. Once a weapon or item is equipped, you can ready it with X and let go to throw/fire. But that's not all, you can also use the left and right trigger to peek in the respective direction and hold both down to get a bit more height. Now this means that just to shoot one guard, you can at times be holding down like 5 or 6 different buttons. That being said, this control scheme is to the benefit of the game. Your best bet for not getting spotted while taking guards out is to get in cover and then peek out, shooting in the short window of time available to you. So you have to be patient and make sure you fully understand that guard's path, so as not to waste bullets or create noise that will lead them off that path and get out of your sight. This strange, obtuse control scheme is designed specifically for this game and the situations and environments it puts you in, and while it will be frustrating at the start, you will get better and better and feel a real sense of progression and improvement in your playing. This makes playing the game really intrinsically rewarding. The controls set the tone and rhythm of gameplay, encouraging you to act with consideration without stripping away freedom in approach or strategy. Although overbearing, the controls justify themselves and heighten the skill ceiling of gameplay in general, increasing replayability and a sense of accomplishment. The tools you take control of are diverse and unique. There's the standard range of firearms, the cardboard box, a number of different radars and grenades, the ability to throw captured animals at guards, different items built to distract guards, and many more. Each adds a layer of depth to how you interact with the environment and enemies, expanding your options for any given situation. No one item or weapon is put front and center, giving the player complete freedom in how they like to progress, encouraging exploration and experimentation. Outside of the silenced tranquilizer. This weapon unfortunately trivializes the act of eliminating guards and is so reliable that players are likely to become dependent on it, instead of being forced to branch out and further experiment. I understand its inclusion, but it is objectively more effective and efficient than so many items that many players may completely miss out on a more rewarding gameplay experience, as many maps can be beaten by simply tranquilizing anything that moves. What I particularly like about these tools is how many of them are non-lethal. A non-lethal playthrough of MGS3 is super fun, and you don't really feel limited or resigned to using 1 or 2 strategies and methods of approach. These non-lethal options also reinforce the anti-war positions of Snake Eater. Not only does a Metal Gear game condemn war and the senseless violence it entails, but gives you as a player an option to avoid it entirely. This aspect gives more legitimacy to its themes, being able to talk the talk and walk the walk. On another level, a non-lethal playthrough increases the complexity of Naked Snake as a character, with him perhaps being averse to violence, starting out with the naive assumption that his position as a soldier could be a morally just one, and ending as a man who was cheated and lied to, becoming jaded and set on a path that will lead to the events in the rest of the series. Strangely, this gameplay decision and freedom adds a small element of role-playing, as weird as that sounds. Now, there aren't just controls and items, but a number of other systems which further deepen the gameplay loop. In terms of combat, there's CQC. This close quarters combat once again provides the player with more choices, but also makes Snake a more variable fighter. Close confrontations don't feel as limited, and the different techniques create a more fleshed out, reactionary game experience. By this I mean, the moment when you get spotted and have to react quickly no longer has you relying on a sloppy 3-hit combo, but gives you the opportunity to grab the guard and choke him out, slam them to the ground, drag them away, or kill them. Getting spotted no longer feels like a moment of certain failure, but the opportunity to get the situation under control and regain composure, with this being easier than ever thanks to CQC. The other main pillar in gameplay is survival. This means managing the stamina bar by scavenging for plants and animals, healing wounds with a number of medical supplies, and having the best camouflage for any given situation. Equipping the best camouflage really just means scrolling down the menu and choosing the highest number, but I still really like it. It provides a little bit of personalization and contributes to an authentic sense of survival. In addition, the camo index acts as a great little stealth meter, giving you constant feedback in regards to your visibility. This extra context makes interacting with the environment less daunting and takes some of the guesswork out of stealth. It lets players feel more confident in their understanding of enemy AI, helping avoid any alerts that may feel a bit unfair to a player without a good grasp on how far guards can see. There are also some ridiculous looking camos, and very unique ones you get for defeating bosses non-lethally. This is an example of the different systems feeding into each other, with non-lethal play rewarding you with survival tools and encouraging a player to engage with those systems meaningfully. The stamina meter is a much more interesting method of health measurement and management. In previous games there was no depth to managing health. There was never any reason not to use a ration if you had a chunk of health missing that was equal to or greater than what the ration would refill, making for a choice that required zero thought. The stamina meter, however, is much more involved. Over time your stamina will deplete, and the lower your stamina, the slower your health will regenerate. You can regain stamina by eating plants and animals found in the environment. Different things restore different amounts of stamina, so you may want to pick and choose what you hunt, being more efficient instead. On the flip side, you can't just stock up at the beginning and forget about hunting anything new as food goes rotten. So not only is there an element of freedom in managing health, but if you throw rotten food near a hungry guard, he will eat it and get sick, allowing you to walk right by. I mean, how fucking fantastic! Even the mistake of letting food go rotten develops into a new, non-lethal stealth tool. And on top of that, if Snake eats something for the first time, you can call up paramedic and talk about it, and these codec calls are some of the most entertaining in the game, while also contributing to the dynamic character development I mentioned earlier. So, you're incentivized by this dialogue to look for new plants and animals, which requires exploration of the game maps. With that forcing you to avoid and deal with guards from new angles, making each area feel less like a go from A to B affair, despite the fact that the vast majority of the game is like that. And then even on top of that, your stamina degrades circumstantially, where equipping heavy equipment and running up hills will cause it to drain faster, and at less than 50% stamina, Snake's hands will shake, making first person aiming harder. Holy shit, this is absolutely flawless design. This stamina system feels justified and purposeful. It's not some annoying meter management, but an ever-changing part of the game that ties back into a myriad of other mechanics, and the narrative and characters. It's fun to engage with on a number of levels and becomes integral to the game experience due to its importance across different systems and aspects of the game. Now, the reason I've talked at such length about stamina is because it's representative of what makes Metal Gear Solid 3 such a fantastic, meaningful game. Each system is so well considered, with them weaving in and out of each other to create an experience that feels full and complete. The game is interconnected without being tangled, and experiencing it all as a player is immensely satisfying and rewarding. Unfortunately, not all of the gameplay is quite as deep. Healing wounds is never very complex, and there are no character interactions that reward you for using the system beyond the immediate boost in health. I do, however, think it's still valuable, as it contributes to the overarching feeling of truly surviving that these survival mechanics create, which in turn raises the tension of stealth and makes sneaking so much fun. There's also having to escort Eva around near the end of the game, which feels messily executed. You're hounded by a lot of guards pretty quickly, and I never feel like I have enough time to hide Snake and Eva. This makes for a frustrating experience as the rules of this section aren't established fairly, with this feeling only amplifying on a non-lethal playthrough where the panic of this moment could easily ruin your run. It's a shame, because the latter parts of these areas are quite fun, bringing a new rhythm and flow to stealth, but it's introduced without any grace or respect for the player. So we've talked about the gameplay systems and how they interact with the other elements of the game. We've yet to talk about the most important thing to Metal Gear Solid 3's success as a video game and a Metal Gear game, its structure. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 are very linear. You may be able to travel back through earlier areas, but your objectives are for the most part explicit and singular, with one exception being the bomb disarming in MGS2. So you're mostly moving through corridors, literally. Now, I don't say that as a bad thing. A smaller, linear experience allows for an attention to detail that's not feasible in an open-ended game. I personally find the linearity of Metal Gear games refreshing in the bloated market of open-world titles that are too big for their own good and could be improved with a reduction in scope. And you may be thinking, why single out MGS 1 and 2? There's no freedom of objective in Snake Eater, and you're mostly trying to get from one side of an area to another. Isn't that linear? And now you're probably wondering how I knew exactly what you were thinking and how you'd word it, but contractually I'm not allowed to answer that, so I'll stick to the first question. Yes, the overarching structure of Metal Gear Solid 3 is linear. You consistently have a single objective, and no objectives can be completed out of order. But let's instead take a look at the level-to-level structure where the freedom can be found. Instead of corridors, you find yourself in small but open jungle environments. MGS3 is essentially a series of small sandboxes connected by hallways, and that's the magic of this game. You have moment-to-moment freedom. When you enter an area, you're met with a lot of possibilities. These possibilities grow as you take into account the game systems and stealth tools that I talked about earlier, with the number of approaches and outcomes feeling massive. This is the perfect structure for a Metal Gear game. The story pacing is not completely killed by your freedom, as these sandboxes are small and digestible, and the gameplay is still being crafted beautifully the whole way through, thanks to its narrow width, but incredible depth. A balance has been found between the two pillars of Metal Gear Solid games, narrative and gameplay. These areas feel natural and deliberate, but open to interpretation. The player decides how they interact with it, but behind the scenes, each possible interaction has been considered and designed for. So this structure is great as a framing for the experience, but what about those small sandboxes? What are they actually like? For the vast majority of the game, we're making our way through the iconic Russian jungle that we all know and love. This setting is the first thing that makes these sandboxes great. Their shape and topology is much more variable and dynamic, changing between areas to consistently create new angles to approach from. This differs from MGS 1 and 2, where it could often feel like they were on a grid, filled with sharp turns and flat planes, as well as a top-down camera that further emphasizes this homogeneous feel. The slopes of MGS 3 aren't very dramatic, but they shift your perspective enough, especially when in first person, that guards will consistently have the advantage unless you hide yourself away in all the vegetation. This vegetation is a fantastic addition to the game. You'll always have a higher camouflage rating lying in the grass than you will out in the open, and it's placed so well that wrapping your head around an area usually involves hopping between different patches of grass to see around obstacles or over slopes. Crawling into grass also forces you into the first-person view, which means that the gentle inclines I just touched on are suddenly a lot more pronounced, hence the new angles that are produced by these very inclines. In addition, this forced first-person perspective increases the tension of stealth, as you have to rely on your knowledge of guard patterns and what you can simply hear. If you're not using a radar, that is. There's a variety of radars in this game, each using a different method of detection, and none being quite as broken as the Soliton radar. Personally, I think the radars should be used very sparingly, as overuse dampens the tension of stealth, which is unfortunate because this heightened tension encourages you to distract guards instead of just trying to slip by them, causing the player to make use of all these neat stealth items they have in their inventory. Here we can see how the structure of these areas, on multiple levels, outline and interact with the gameplay experience to improve it overall. It also seems though that these radars show a lack of conviction in totally transforming the core gameplay. There's an attempt at curbing the use of the radars by giving them limited battery, which does stop you from staring at it, rather flipping it on and off to get a glance, but I think the game overall would be improved with their removal. Thematically, these slopes and the grass, combined with other details like bodies of water, trees, hollowed out logs, and a few buildings, creates levels that are way more varied and ever-changing, while still making consistent sense. Well, other than the fact that this jungle is in fucking Russia. The jungle setting also does a good job of reinforcing a looser, more casual tone in the story and presentation. The backdrops of yellows and greens combined with the natural light allows for a believable shift between upbeat, optimistic conversations and an isolating atmosphere that once again works in conjunction with the gameplay to stack on some more tension. The game isn't just jungle though, and by looking at the more traditionally Metal Gear areas, we can see the consistent effort to approach level design and structure in a new way. The best example of this is Groznygrad. Groznygrad is the military base where the Shagohod is being held, made up of a whole lot of concrete and metal. So here, if anywhere in Snake Eater, is where you'd expect it to shift back to the corridor-focused vision cone affair that MGS1, and to a lesser extent MGS2, was. But that's not really what we see. Infiltrating Groznygrad from the outside has us navigating expansive tarmacs, dotted with guards and different structures. Guards have a tougher time spotting you, with your urban camo only exacerbating this fact. Combine this with the distinctly segmented areas and we get stealth that looks more like MGS1 while still feeling like MGS3. Gameplay also stays fresh here, as the environmental shift recontextualizes it and breathes a bit of new life into the player as we approach this foreign land from a place of ignorance and excitement. With this all being said, MGS1 and 2 mostly took place in interiors, not exteriors, so let's take the comparisons to a more apt place. The interiors of Groznygrad look closer to the location of the earlier titles, but gameplay is still distinctly different. The lack of Soliton radar immediately makes patient observation a bigger asset in comparison to those earlier games, and the hallways aren't as tight and claustrophobic. The plethora of ways to distract guards with items and the wider range of guard interactions thanks to CQC overall makes the game, just like the exteriors, look like MGS1 but very much play like MGS3. This only becomes more obvious as disguises are common in these buildings, allowing you to walk right by enemies. The reason I'm harping on about this is because it shows that this structural change in the game and its environments aren't shallow. They run through the whole experience. Another reason I'm emphasizing the level design philosophy and through lines is to touch on another vital part of Metal Gear Solid 3, experimentation and exploration. The game's structure and map design encourages exploration, and the large range of rewards for exploration only incentivizes it more. You'll find completely optional camos, weapons, items, ammo, and healing supplies. And what are all those things? Items that directly affect gameplay, encouraging experimentation. What I've said about freedom may all seem immediate and short term, like player choice isn't really respected in the long term, and that's true about the narrative, for the better I believe, but a player's decisions can extend further than you may initially believe. Here's an example. You're playing the game for the first time and kill a snake to eat later. As you go, you interrogate a guard, and he mentions something about blowing up a food shack. You soon come into an area with a small building filled with food that restores a lot of stamina. After more exploring, you find another shack in the back corner with TNT in it. You then realize what the guard was referring to. So you place the TNT in the food shack just to see what happens. You detonate the explosive and the shack's destroyed, with the noise proving to be a good distraction. Continuing on. A couple hours later, guards won't stop mentioning how hungry they are. You look into your backpack to see if you have anything to take advantage of that, and what do you find? A rotten snake. You hadn't eaten it because the food shack from earlier had way better stuff in it. So now you equip the rotten snake, throw it in front of a guard, who then eats it despite how gross it is because he's that hungry. Finally, you walk right by because he's too busy throwing up to notice you. Small, throwaway decisions, some that you weren't even aware of, come back to have benefits hours later. So with this example, we come to see one integral reason why this structure is perfect for a Metal Gear title specifically. The Metal Gear series is known for its details, the small things you'd never notice just from skimming the game. Like in MGS2, if you stay out in the rain too long, Snake will catch a cold. This causes him to sneeze, making guards who can hear the sneeze come out and investigate. Such an unnecessary, specific thing that makes the experience that much richer. Now, how do you find all these wonderful little moments? You explore, and you experiment. Other Metal Gear games use this attention to detail as an incentive to both explore and experiment, but in Metal Gear Solid 3, these details are just one of the many incentives to explore and experiment. And we yet again find another part of Metal Gear's DNA feeling better justified and implemented in MGS3. So, in case I haven't beat this into you enough, I'll say it again. The parts of Snake Eater are woven together beautifully, without a single tangle or knot. Sure, there are a couple loose threads, but despite this, the game holds up on its own tension. It's fully supported by the other parts of itself, in complete harmony, to create a holistic, intriguing, enrapturing, almost flawless video game. And that's why Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is the perfect Metal Gear game.